Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. Welcome to another installment of Through the Ages, where we look back at how civilizations in Age of Empires 2 have evolved between their original design and today. In this episode, we're going to round out the Conquerors civilizations in our series with the Spanish, who even became the inspiration for that expansion's icon. Their original bonuses were actually quite similar to what they are today, though there have been some steady incremental adjustments behind the scenes to their two unique units over that time, and they now have a couple of additional civ bonuses. Their original ones were 33% more gold from trade cards and trade cogs for the whole team, which for years was indisputably one of, if not the best team bonus in the game. For civ bonuses, their builders work 30% faster, which is nearly the same as now, with one situational exception we'll see later. Their blacksmith upgrades don't cost gold, and their cannon galleons benefit from ballistics, and were sped up to 4 times the usual projectile speed. Looking back at developer commentary at the time, the legendary Sandy Peterson, who worked as the lead designer on the Conquerors expansion, saw Spanish as a powerful generalist civilization, and elsewhere noted he saw them as an all-around solid civ, which made a lot of sense, as they had the second most technologies in total. In a lengthy exchange, he drew a particular distinction between the Spanish and Byzantines, who were similar in their very wide tech trees, but overtly made the distinction between Byzantines as primarily defensive and counter-unit oriented, while Spanish were meant to be more offensive. At the time, it really feels like just about everyone put a lot of emphasis on the number of technologies that civilizations had, and seeing that as equally or even more important than early eco bonuses, which just shows how much more aggressive the meta has become today. Sandy Peterson also noted he personally thought highly of Spanish as a naval civilization, ranking them similar to Koreans, Vikings, Byzantines, and Saracens, which also maybe suggests the greater emphasis the original developers put on the cannon galleon for Spanish, being an anti-naval unit, which very few people would say today. The faster-moving projectiles definitely felt very strong to me as a kid playing the campaigns, since naval battles were often at a scale you could dodge incoming cannon galleon shots manually, which I'm sure we all have memories of doing, and were shocked by the Spanish. I should also note that coinciding with the release of Age of Conquerors, there was a major patch, simply called 1.0, which is when things like Halberdier, Thumbring, Bloodlines, Hussar, etc. were introduced in the game, along with unique technologies at the castle, and is also when things like the Teuton Death Stars were patched. It was a pretty big deal. Less famous was patch 1.0b, released a year later, which was much smaller in scope, but introduced some important changes, like Bombard Towers dealing pierce instead of melee damage, Captain Siege Ram losing their gold cost to upgrade, and is when Spanish picked up a new bonus for faster reloading gunpowder units, including Conquistadors, though cannon galleons were unaffected until Definitive Edition, in what was probably an oversight. One very curious design choice was of course the Spanish unique lack of a crossbow upgrade at the archery range, and even today only Spanish and Bulgarians share that odd quirk. I tried but couldn't find a good explanation for that given by any developer in an interview, and whether this was something historical, a balance decision, or had something to do with the originally planned Geniteur as the Spanish unique unit, where maybe they wanted to push players away from archers and toward that, it's really hard to say. Particularly as crossbows started to become one of the 2 most dominant units in the online Arabia meta though, the decision ultimately held Spanish back a bit competitively, forcing them into knights or conquistadors somewhat predictably, though that's not to say you'd never see Spanish archers. Zero Empires commented at the time he felt the lack of crossbow held them back, and made Drushfast Castle the play, which was certainly much more in style back then. Then again, maybe my favorite gameplay I've ever uploaded to my channel involved all-in feudal Spanish archers, so it's really a case of a rule that is pretty fun to break. For their part, the Spanish unique units also had a notably different balance initially. The Conquistador was actually a fair bit stronger back then, at least after its faster reload time in patch 1.0b, as it didn't take anti-cavalry archer bonus damage from elite skirmishers and had 2 pierce armor instead of the 1 that the non-elite version has now, while the missionary for its part was a much weaker unit across the board. Unlike today, it didn't benefit from bloodlines, husbandry, and fervor, though fervor was bugged for all monks not carrying relics, so in most cases did nothing for anyone anyway, but they also then healed just half as quickly as monks. The general direction of balance changes has definitely been to make the Conquistador a bit weaker and the missionary stronger over the decades. To that point, in HD's Forgotten expansion, along with all civilizations, the Spanish gained a Castle Age unique tech, Inquisition. It was originally quite expensive at 400 food and 400 gold, but let their monks and missionaries convert units roughly 1 second faster on average. Missionaries also started to benefit from bloodlines and fervor at this point, with fervor now working properly in HD. That was it for changes until African kingdoms, where the cost of inquisition was dropped. Missionaries no longer required castles to create, as a common theme for all non-castle unique units at the time, and the legendary Spanish plus 33% extra trade gold was dropped to plus 25%. That last change in particular, with the game now under the direction of Forgotten Empires, I think shows a bit of a philosophical difference between our current developers and the original team at Ensemble Studios. You can tell from Age of Empires 1 that Ensemble Studios favored large 33%, 50%, and sometimes plus 100% size bonuses to really make civilization differences impactful, whereas I'd say Forgotten Empires leans more toward modest multipliers for bonuses, which just naturally leads to closer balance, but maybe a bit less distinctiveness between civs. In fairness, that just makes sense as you continue to add new civilizations and want to keep things balanced. I'm not saying one approach is better than the other, but Spanish are a good example of how the most extreme bonuses have been toned back over time. This is where Spanish sat for the final years of HD, never really being fast enough in Dark and Feudal Age to be considered top tier on Arabia, but could shine in more closed maps where you're in a better position to reach your Conquistador and other gunpowder units. One interesting exchange I found on AoE Zone at the time was someone asking what Spanish should do as the flank in a team game, where typically players would want to go for crossbows. One of the responses was to go knights if there was lag and conquistadors if there wasn't, or go conquistadors if the opponent is making knights regardless of lag. Rather than focus on the specific advice, it's interesting to look back at the idea, and longtime players know it's true. Lag was a huge part of the game back then, and as that aspect of the game improved in the late 2010s, and especially with Definitive Edition, the devs almost had to nerf conquistadors, Mangudai, and the like, solely for the fact that players are now actually using them to their potential with cleaner micro. With that in mind, Definitive Edition then brought a few notable changes to Spanish. The first was, of course, they switched their Western European architecture, shared with Britons and Franks for example, in favor of the Mediterranean set. At that time, they shared it with Italians, Portuguese, and Byzantines, though is now used by 8 different civilizations, making it actually the most common architecture set today. This is also when the Conquistadors started to receive anti-cavalry archer bonus damage, which is dealt by skirmishers, genitours, and Berber camel archers. In addition to the fact it nerfed the Conquistador against skirmishers in particular, I always found it funny how well this targeted Berbers as a counter to Spanish, given the historical context of the two civs. Probably the biggest hit to the Spanish in Definitive Edition though was the removal of their iconic voice line in their intro song. Definitive Edition was also when missionary healing rate was doubled to match the monk, as prior to this the general feeling was missionaries just did monk things but worse, and the faster speed did not make up for that in most players' eyes. Overall, they certainly weren't boring, but Spanish had never really been considered top tier or bottom tier prior to this, or even after the Definitive Edition changes. They were definitely better on closed maps than open ones as a general rule, but quietly players were at this point becoming aware they were actually the clear number 1 on the ladder by win rate on one particular map, Nomad. That was partly the Conquistador at work, but their faster building villagers also meant their town center would go up first consistently, putting them almost always a villager ahead. And that combined with often being safe enough to fast castle into an early castle drop meant they were number 1, and it wasn't particularly close, with a 62% win rate. It took a bit of time, but they were eventually dethroned as Kings of Nomad a year after Dynasties of India came out, in what would be the biggest patch ever for Spanish. In that, Inquisition improved missionaries even further with +1 conversion range, the non-elite Conquistador lost 1 Pierce armor, weakening that always dangerous unit, and this is also when Spanish received a new bonus, giving them 20 gold for each tech they research. The pairing of this with their blacksmith techs not costing gold is something I always found to be a clever synergy, and seemed like a nice way to give them a bit of an early bonus on open maps while not affecting their closed map performance very much, and also sticking with a clear gold theme for the civilization. They then received the new Gambazins technology, and their faster working villagers no longer applied to their initial town center, meaning their first TC on Nomad went up at the usual speed. Spanish are still top 10 on that map, but after that change have never been quite what they were. That brings us to where Spanish are today, with a design that's remained remarkably consistent and a pretty straightforward arc to their balance changes. They've been weakened in their trade bonus, Conquistadors, and Nomad start, all 3 of which were near universally agreed to be broken in some situations. In compensation, there's been a steady push for their missionaries and what I consider a very fitting bonus in their extra gold when researching technologies, all while staying committed to their original lack of crossbow. That'll do it for this retrospective though. I admit I let this series fall by the wayside last year, but I'd like to get back to it and at least finish off a few more civilizations before the series concludes. It's a lot of fun looking back at the old patch notes and making sense of the different changes. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.